welcome everyone to another Sappy Hour. It's a lot brighter out tonight than it was at our last Sappy Hour with our time change. I'd like to welcome everybody, and before we get started, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Leamington, Ontario tonight around Point National Park, and I'm on the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, composed of the Ojibwa, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. Specifically, this is the home of Caldwell First Nation and part of the House of Walpole Island First Nation. We acknowledge the caregivers of this land and all the moccasins that have traveled it over time. And I guess we're going to drive right into things tonight. Joining me this evening, as always, are Kaylin and Mike, our fearless leaders. And we've also brought Kathy Jones in tonight, who I'm sure is a familiar face or name to many of you. She likes to ask us to volunteer for birds a lot. And Kathy's going to be talking about owls and owl surveys tonight, which I know we all love owls, and can't wait to hear what she has to tell us about what we can do to help with the Atlas project, specifically with owl surveys. So I'm going to pass it right over to you, Kathy, and we'll continue on with the evening.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm just going to set up my slideshow here and share the screen. All right. You guys can see that clear enough? Now I just have to do one more thing here. You might have to help me with this one. I can't find the sound share now.
Yeah, so when you go to share it, there should be something when you choose like which window to share, it should be at the very bottom. So you might need to stop sharing and then share again.
Oh, that's fun. All right, I choose a window.
Yeah, and
share sound. Oh, they moved that.
Just trying to keep you on your toes, Kathy.
Yes, I know I need that. Welcome everyone, and I'm so glad to be here. Let me know if you can't hear me well. My name, as Sarah said, is Kathy Jones, and today I'm just going to talk a bit about the owl surveys for the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas. And yes, I put dumb buns in here because I need a good excuse for a dumb pun once in a while. Quick review, we're going to do that first about the protocol. I discussed it last year or the year before. We're going to go over a bit of an update on how last year went, the data, a bit of the update on the survey needs in the app, and that'll be about it. Kaylin, I don't know, do you normally wait till questions at the end or do you take them during it?
Yeah, if you have any questions throughout, you can pop them in the Q&A if you're here on Zoom with us. And then if you're on Facebook Live, then you can go ahead and put them in the chat. And at the very end, we'll be answering the questions after the presentation.
Okay. I thought I should wake everybody up. So let's start with an eastern screech owl. Who doesn't like hearing an owl at night? It's a fun thing to do, and we all enjoy it. But I won't play it too long because if you hear it too often, it gets quite annoying. So the Ontario Special Surveys are a group of point count surveys that have been put together for the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas. And they are predominantly owl surveys, nocturnal surveys, because they wouldn't normally be caught by the regular point counts. But we also have night jars and marsh bird surveys. If you want to learn anything more about these surveys, you can just go to the birdsontario.org site and then go to special surveys, and they're right there. So they're very easy to find to learn more about them on the website. To give you a basic idea of the program, we're going to talk about these three particular areas that we split the province into, and I'm calling them southern in green, and a central area, and then above 47 degrees, we have the northern area. And for our three big regional Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas owl surveys, they are split into these three regions. Now, one thing I want to let people know is these are not programs that need extreme bird ID skill. There's not that many owls in Ontario, and if you have decent hearing, you should be able to identify the ones in each region. You do need, I'm not so sure I'd go so far as higher field skill needs, but they are a little bit higher depending on where you are, because you got to navigate roads at night and you have to find the survey points. And if you start to think about northern and north central Ontario, that could be a bit challenging during the month of April when most of these surveys happen, but they are a lot of fun. So the three I'm going to talk about today are the Eastern Screech Owl Survey, the Central Owl Survey, which is Northern Saw-Whet Owl and Barred Owl, and the Northern Owl Survey, which is Great Gray Owl and Boreal Owl. So those are the three main ones I'm going to talk about, and we'll go a little bit over the other ones. But these are the three big surveys that we're trying to get done in Ontario because they provide us data that's very helpful for analysis and for knowing how these species are doing that won't be as well represented in the point count surveys and the checklist surveys. So where do they happen? Well, the Eastern Screech Owl is the southern one, so it happens mostly in southwestern Ontario. The Central Owl Survey, the Barred Owl, and Northern Saw-Whet Owl is more the central region. And while the Great Gray Owl and Boreal Owl Survey, what we now call the Northern Owl Survey, is in the northern portion of Ontario. So it's easy to see which works for your area. Do they just work in your area? That's a good question. There are some areas near, like Thunder Bay, or Rainy Lake, where you could readily have enough locations to do a barred owl survey. So, and there's places perhaps in the southern areas you could do barred owls, and there's places in the central area you might be able to do Eastern Screech. The biggest thing to remember is that for these point counts, you need a set number of stations. And if you're not getting that reasonable number of stations in the appropriate habitat, maybe just a checklist survey or a point count would be a better choice for you versus the standard owl survey. So I also wanted to mention the Ontario Nocturnal Owl Survey points because this amplifies the data that the Ontario Breeder Bird Atlas will collect it. This uses the exact same technique in the central region and the northern region. It just has a different sampling point design. So eventually the Ontario Nocturnal Owl Survey data will be pushed into the atlas. It hasn't been done yet, and you'll see on my maps later where we expect that data to come from. So if you are already involved with the Ontario Nocturnal Owl Survey, you're already an atlaser, and your data will become part of this important project. As I mentioned before, there are some other surveys, some great projects that the committee set up. There's one to identify northern hawk owls, which is a cool species. It's in northern Ontario earlier in the year, and it's a daytime survey, which is also nice. We also have long-eared owl survey, which is another very unique one, where you're looking for young owls. Mike can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I think it's just before they fledge because they will call at that time of the year. There's a marsh bird survey. It's a lot like the Great Lakes Marsh Monitoring Program, but it covers a different habitat and more appropriate and more areas within the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas. There's also the Eastern Whippoorwill and the common nighthawks are done by the Nightjar Survey, which again is very similar to another survey in the Canadian Nightjar Survey. And this is important because since we're using those other surveys like the Marsh Bird Survey, the Ontario Nocturnal Owl Survey, and the Canadian Nightjar Survey to amplify the information collected. So it's a very powerful tool that we have that we can work with. So I'm not going to go over the protocols, there's a lot of them, but I just wanted to let you know that when you go to that special survey section, you will find the protocols, and you just need to make sure that you read them and understand them. They're very similar. They all start with a single page of summary of the basic concept, but they have their own unique characteristics for the target species in the area you're in. And that's important to keep in mind that target species will be decided based on your location. You'll also have to have some component of habitat in there that helps you decide where to survey. And you'll also see that all the MP3 files are also on the website, so you can learn them. This is a project you can learn from scratch and learn the ID for most of these species and do them. So don't undervalue your skill. If you have heard a few owls, you can probably do the survey without a problem. You can easily teach yourself up on it. As with the regular point counts, you use the random point counts has been set up for your square. What you do differently though is you use 10, and when you start at the first and you choose the first 10 in appropriate habitat for the species you're looking at. Now, I myself would probably choose 12 or 13. And the reason for that is because characteristics at night will be different from the day. And if you just choose 10, I can almost guarantee you one of those stations will not be acceptable for some reason at night. It'll be too noisy, it'll be too busy. Something will make it not acceptable. And it's a lot easier to find another station during the daytime when you're looking for habitat than at night. Oh, how about another call? So some volunteers will have the luxury of hearing that call. That's a great gray owl. And it's found above 47 degrees latitude in the breeding time. You might see him south of that outside of breeding time. And how these protocols work for all of these programs is you use the appropriate playback to convince the owls to call for you. You're telling them that, hey, I'm another owl in your territory, and I want you to I'm invading your space, and they have to respond to that. And Sarah had this wonderful quote a few years back, like, it's some jerk is invading my owl space, and they have to respond to that. The playbacks are specifically set up to a certain timed length. You play them, you get a buzz, and you play them all the way through. And when you get the final buzz, that's the length of your point survey. So that length of playback changes on the different protocols, but it's all basically the same style. And you play it once per stop, and you complete all stops until you have 10, ideally in the single evening. I think there's options so that you can do some in other evenings, but the ideal is all in the same evening. Now, a point that I often get is that the broadcast does not work. It's no sound at the beginning. That's done on purpose to match North American national standards for Canada. All these broadcasts have 2 minutes of silence at the beginning, and that's done specifically right across all owl surveys in Canada. So here's an idea what I mean by differing styles for different ones. The eastern screech owls have more calls, but the shorter in length with a shorter silent listening periods. So you start your tape, you hear a buzz. You get 2 minutes of silence split up by a couple buzzes. Then you have your first owl call for a certain length of time, 20 or 30 seconds, and then followed by silence. And that pattern is repeated for a certain length of time. The longest one is the central one, the barred owl northern saw-whet owl survey. And that's because barred owls are known to be notoriously late at responding to broadcasts. They respond well, but it takes them some time. Great gray owl surveys are very short. They're right around just under 5 minutes. I don't recall what the eastern screech owl one is, but that looks like 1, 2, 7 minutes, 8 minutes long by the looks of it, about that. So it all depends on the species and what you need to do to target that species in the area. Now, some tips. If anybody, this is a really fun survey. I have not done it for way too long, but I enjoyed doing it. But there's some things you need to keep in mind when you're out there. The biggest one is actually frogs. There is nothing that will mess up your survey more than way too many frogs calling. So the ideal is to get your surveys done early enough in the season for most of these surveys that the frogs are quiet. When they start to call, it becomes much more frustrating. Frost heave on some of these roads that you have to go on is an issue. What do you do with planes, trains, automobiles, and noisy things? Sometimes you have to give up on a station or a stop. I guess this is a point. Remember the program you're talking about, Kathy. This is a point in this one. Sometimes you have to give up a point if it's too noisy at that location. But often it's a judgment call. Like if you're just starting into the silent listening period and a plane goes by and it's way too noisy, or a truck and you can't hear a thing, restart the survey. But if you're 3/4 of the way through the survey and it's already broadcasting the calls, you do not want to restart that survey. You just finish the survey and make a note of the noise. Houses are an issue on these routes. The best thing I can suggest is that if you have to survey near a house, try to time it so that you do it before the kids' bedtimes, and that'll make you much more popular with the adults in the house. The other thing is agitated owls. We are broadcasting territorial calls, so those owls are going to get angry or agitated and annoyed. The biggest thing to do is do your work, and especially if they're getting agitated, pack up your stuff after you've done your survey and move on to the next station. Don't linger just for a good picture or just because you want to be there. Recognize that although you have to do that full length of the survey as prescribed in the broadcast, when it's done, it's time to go. Now, you've heard me say a lot about broadcasts. All these things use broadcast calls of territories calls, except for, I believe, the long-eared owl one. I think you just listen for that one. And the biggest thing to remember is amplification of the sound of those calls. You want to have enough sound coming out of your machine to cover about half the distance between normal point stations. So you want a fair bit of distance there. For the central and the northern, we tend to estimate you want to have the quietest call going at least 250 meters. And that comes right down to loudness. And to this day, loudness for speakers usually is tied to the battery size. You rarely, if ever, get a small speaker with a lot of loudness. You cannot do this just from your phone without a speaker. You have to have some kind of speaker attached. You can buy one. It's a good excuse if you want an excuse. But you can also, I always recommend to people to walk into the nearest thrift store and see what they have there that just takes an inline from your phone. And that'll work just as well too. But we all have your favorites. The JLB clip is one that the Atlas really likes. The one with the heart is my favorite. I've dropped my little cheerleader speaker in the water twice, and it just keeps on kicking. If you have a game player around home, that works. Or the old DeWatt radio box, they have inline speakers. So there's lots of options out there. I'm at the point now I'm not recommending using your vehicle. I know some people do. I've seen a few things lately about barred owls picking up speakers and barred owls flying into vehicles and inside avian guards. I'm thinking I'd rather my volunteers not be in the truck with the barred owls. So I'm suggesting try to get a broadcast unit versus using your vehicle if you think that's a good idea. One more owl call. Speaking of barred owls, that's a barred owl call. Now, I wanted to take a mention and talk about the ethics of broadcast because it always comes into conversation. And the biggest thing is to remember that you're doing this for a purpose. You do those point sample counts once for the owls for the whole 5 years of the survey, and then you're done. Once you hear the owl there's no need to go back once you've heard the owl on that site and you know it's present there. And you should not be using the broadcasts for the owl surveys outside of the protocol and other occasions. A little bit more data. There's always data. There's an online data form that I particularly like. I like the paper form because I'm not a big person to use electronics in the field. It probably relates a lot to the dropping things in the marsh. But the other option we have is the Atlas app, the Nature Counts app. And I know that last year's app was a lot trickier. This year's app, it's rolling out to my Ontario Nocturnal Owl Survey volunteers as well, and I'm impressed with it. And I don't like technology, so for me being impressed with it means it's very good at what it does. I'm very happy with the way it functions, and I'm thinking people will be having a great opportunities to use it. There's some new information about that I can share with people about how to deal with being off offline and being away from data and Wi-Fi and collecting data and how you can download it. And the only other thing I would recommend, if you are using the app, 10 stations, especially 10 barred owl stations, a lot of time. So you may want to make sure you have a backup charger for your phone. That might be one of the biggest things that'll be to your advantage when you're surveying. I would also, I'm not a technology person. I don't think I'd want my phone playing the broadcast as well as doing the app work. So I'd be inclined to say, have your partner do the broadcast with their phone while you do the data collection with the app. Now, results. I don't have a lot, and Kaylin, we can stop. And Sarah, we can stop anytime because this is just all some talking points here. This great picture was sent to me by Christian Free. He just did some northern hawk owl and boreal great gray owl work in the Long Lac area, and they skidooed in. He said it went really well. They got northern hawk owls. They got lots of boreals. They did not get any great gray owls, which is a little concerning. I would have thought they'd see him there. So I just thought I'd share this great picture with you guys. And then I thought I'd talk a little bit about coverage. Now, this map is for the Northern Owl Survey. The squares that are colored in are squares that have been surveyed. The little stringy looking bacteria things are the Ontario Nocturnal Owl Survey routes. So you will see we have a lot of gaps in data collection. We probably will not see all those Ontario Nocturnal Owl routes surveyed, but we will get a large proportion of it. But you still see there's a lot of gaps and spaces there when data needs to be collected. Last year was a tough year for owl surveys because of the level of winter in Northern Ontario. A lot of people could not get into sites. This year, from what I'm hearing, it's better. So if you want to do Northern Ontario owl surveys, it's a good year for it. I can't make any guarantees about next year, so it's a good year to take advantage of. Now here's Central Ontario. As you can see, the coverage here is better, but we still have some big gaps where there's not any barred owls being surveyed. And I think I would argue that there's plenty of space there to get more surveys done. And if anybody wants to, they see an area near them, they should reach out to the regional coordinator. There's not many surveys been conducted in Southwestern Ontario. That's expected, but I just wanted to mention that if there's enough habitat to get 10 stations in appropriate habitat for barred owls, then that's a reasonable place to do a barred owl survey in the southwestern portion of Ontario. And finally, Eastern Screech Owl, which I have not done, but looks like it's a riot to do. There's still lots of gaps there. Like there's a big one around the London St. Thomas corridors. There's a whole area in the southwestern area, some up near Barrie. Certainly there is opportunities there. Again, you have to base it on habitat where surveys can be done for the species, and they would be a lot of fun to do. Now, the results I have here are just general owl results, but I thought you might find it interesting. So all I'm showing here is where the atlas from 2021 to 2023 has shown breeding evidence of these species. So the data could have been collected by any format, but it's in the atlas now. And again, keep in mind that the Ontario Nocturnal Owl surveys have not been pushed into this yet. So you can see there's not a lot there for great gray owls. That probably relates a lot to the lack of access in the north last winter. It was not a good year to go surveying in the north last winter. We had surveys that couldn't be conducted in places that most years would be conducted. There's a boreal owl in the north and in central Ontario. Again, there's not much data there. The most recent analysis for the Ontario Nocturnal Owl Survey showed a significant decline in the species. So I would love to see a lot more data collected on it, a lot more squares done for the Northern Survey, just to help us get a better handle if that is a concern or not, and where they are being found. There's your barred owl. A lot of coverage there. You'll really see what I mean by it's gone beyond the area where we expect to find it. Still space for more coverage. I think we probably still don't have all the birds identified. This is the species that the Ontario Nocturnal Owl Survey has shown to be significantly increasing. So it's a good idea to go a little bit beyond its normal range expectations to look for it as well, whether it's with the point sample, whether it's with checklists or just being out at night looking for other things. Just keep your ears open for them. Northern saw-whet owl. Again, I see where we could do with some more coverage for that species. But it's got a bit greater coverage than some of the other species we've seen. Eastern screech owl, that's where it's been found. So it's very easy to see where we need to look because there's based on this, plus it gives you an idea where they're seeing this species. Great horned owl. Great horned owl is an interesting one. The Ontario Nocturnal Owl Survey is showing it is decreasing in central Ontario and increasing in northern Ontario. So that's a very interesting item to keep in mind. But certainly I can see that's a very interesting result to me, and I'm looking forward to what it looks like in a couple more years. Northern hawk owl, we don't have a lot of those. It's not surprising. It's a new survey, new technique. It's a difficult owl to find. They're diurnal, far north, so they're just hard to pick up on the breeding territory. If they're there, I think you see them. It's just happened that you have to be there when they are. Long-eared owl has an interesting distribution. I suspect we need a lot more looking for that species by many different ways to fill in a lot of gaps, because if it's spread out in such a way, I can see us having many more occurrences of that. Oh, and that's it. So I will stop sharing, or unless you guys want me to continue to share, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Well, we have a bunch of questions lined up for you, Kathy.
Cool.
The first one's from Victoria. Oh, did you want to say something, Mike?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks, Kathy, for going over that. And so we're our normal Sappy hours. We have a talk like what Kathy just did, and so we encourage specific questions about the owl survey tonight. But if you have any questions about atlasing, don't feel like you're restricted to just owl survey questions.
Okay. All right, so we'll get to our first questions from Victoria, and she has said she has already completed the Eastern Screech Owl survey for this year, and she wants to know how she can input the data when I do not currently have a regional coordinator, and they are in Lambton County.
Well, I don't think you have any problems inputting the data. Am I correct, Mike? They just go online and they input it? Yeah.
Yep. Just go on. You can go on through the website. That's the easiest thing if you didn't do it with the app. But you don't need your RC. The RC will do the data review eventually of it, but you should be able to enter it yourself. No problem.
All right.
If you do have any trouble getting it entered, just contact the Atlas office and we'll give you a hand.
All right. Our next question's from Christine, and she is wondering, for the northern saw-whet owl, the call is unusual, i.e. it includes a barred owl. Is this correct, and why?
If I follow the question, she's asking about the broadcast.
Yeah.
The broadcast is for both species, for both the central and the northern Ontario protocols. There's two target species on each, and I'm sorry if I did not clarify that. For the northern broadcast, you have boreal owl and gray owl, and the target species are boreal owl and gray owl. For the central broadcast, your target species are northern saw-whet owl and barred owl, but the broadcast itself includes boreal owl and barred owl. And the reason why we don't have northern saw-whet on it is because northern saw-whets will quite readily respond to a boreal owl broadcast, but they're not as inclined, but boreal owls will not respond to the northern saw-whet. So we've made that little change so that if there are boreal owls within your survey area, we might pick them up. Hopefully that answers your questions, if I got it right.
All right. Let us know, Christine, if you have any more questions. John says that his square is almost entirely on private property. Is there a way to find out property ownership for specific parcels of land in order to contact landowners and get permission to do offered point counts in these locations?
I can try to answer this one, but Kaylin, please chime in. So we don't have any centralized way to do that. There's sort of different ways depending on where you are, but we don't have a central place to look up ownership. So the best thing we found is trying to get somebody's attention. Like if you come across a neighbor or something while you're out atlasing, you can ask them if they know who owns the property, something like that. You can ask any local birders you might know if they happen to have some contacts, and you can check in with your RC. They might have an idea too, but it's tricky, especially in Southern Ontario where there's so much private land. But we do of course want you to make sure you have permission before you enter any of that private property.
All right. Okay. Kai would like to know, how do I know how loud my speakers are?
Well, I'd like to actually say something about the last question as well. If those offered point counts for owls, really take a look at the map and make sure you can't do them from the road. Remember, you're broadcasting at least 250 feet for the barred owl and the great gray owl. So you may not have to go right into the site. And I don't know as well for owl surveys, but I know that when I do whippoorwill surveys, I actually hear better in an opening. So you may find you may just have to look at the site more carefully, and you may be able to survey some of those without going into the site. Now, the second question, Sarah, was, well, how do you know if you're
how loud my speakers are?
Well, there's a couple ways. There's the old-fashioned way, and there's the technological way, and then there's the fun way. I guess that's three. The fun way is get yourself a Scream app. And if you have kids, you should have a Scream app anyways for the next party. And what it does is it will measure the decibels of screams. So that is basically a decibel reader, and you can use it on your phone. You need somebody else's phone. There's got to be two phones to make this work. You have a phone in the broadcast, but you can use that to test the loudness of your broadcast. There's also professional decibel apps and professional decibel readers, but I think those are probably a little bit more difficult to get your hands on. And then the old-fashioned way is you drop yourself off on a corner, you have somebody drive up 250 meters and get out of the car, you broadcast your tape, and if they wave back at you that they can see it, your broadcast is far enough. And you do that again at 500 meters. I forget, it's 200, 300, and 500 maybe for the testing for this one. But by doing that, it helps you ensure that you're broadcasting far enough. Depending on, again, it depends, I think, on the species as well, how far it should broadcast.
All right, thank you. Okay, Stephen Price said, I did the protocol in my square 2 years ago. First time, great fun. The road shown on the topo map and the app looked nice, but I found it to be grown over and impassable beyond a few kilometers. So following the protocol about separation, quality habitat, etc., I could not reach and get enough point count sites to finish. I'm not even sure that I could walk over overground trails at night, many kilometers into the bush. All my sites are along current or former forestry roads. Am I done? Should I do something else? Thanks for all the help and advice.
Yeah, I can probably answer this one. So I think the meat of it is if I can't get to 10 stations or 10, owl stations, there's either not enough habitat or not enough roads or whatever the case may be. What do I do? And the answer is just do as many do as many as you can. So if you can't get to all 10, then that's all right. Just do as many as you're able to do, and that's great. So yeah, don't worry about it. I guess you're just done. Maybe move on to the next square, Stephen.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, we've a couple comments from James Kirkland. I did barred owls in my square last spring. and I think I underreported breeding evidence. Can I go back and change them? And said, for example, pairs usually came to my call, and some were swooping at me repeatedly. And at the end of the night, I had more than 7 individuals. I think I entered them all as S.
Yeah, I can cover that. So you can absolutely go back and change a record and adjust the breeding evidence to the appropriate one. The specific examples you're giving, we don't want people to use the A code if something's agitated in response to playback, because you can basically make any bird at any time of year agitated if you play like a recording of its song. So don't use the A code. P code you can use in some situations with owls if they're interacting and in a way that you know it's a pair as opposed to just 2 individuals. But the easy one is the M code. If you have 7 over the course of a night, what the easiest way to do it is just switch to using the M code once you hit 7 individuals on that night. You don't need to go back and change the earlier checklists to M from S. Really, as long as you get one checklist of that survey route with the M code, you've got it covered. So absolutely go back and change if you can. And the M code is probably the one you want to use out of all those, unless you know that it was a pair, because the pair is a higher breeding evidence code than the M.
All right. We had a couple of people just mention for the person who was wondering about how to find out who owns property. People have suggested going to the local land registry office or the local township office. They'll have roll calls and you might be able to get that information that way. So thank you for those who offered some suggestions on that front. Here's a question, and this kind of may answer a few questions in the mix, and this I think came from Facebook. Can you explain how to choose where to do your survey points? I wasn't able to find 10 points that had suitable habitat. What do I do? And the second part of the question is, are there any speakers that are available to borrow?
I can handle most of that. Make sure I don't miss anything, Sarah. As Kaylin mentioned, there are areas where you're not going to get 10 points. That's just the reality of it, especially as you head more towards the southern portion of the province. Each protocol should list the requirements for habitat. Since there's so many, I don't think it's all that great to go over right now, but they will list the requirements for habitat. And the reality is we may not have as much habitat for these species as we used to. And then we just have to accept those fewer numbers of points. Okay, now I've just totally lost the other parts. What am I missing here, Sarah?
So it's basically, how do you choose where to do your survey points? And if you can't find them, what do you do? And I think you answered that.
And I think Mike did have some units to borrow. I would argue at the price of gas, you might be better off going to the thrift store, but I'm sure Mike could probably loan you some if he has them. Mike?
Yeah, so we do have a couple units that basically in each region. So if you're looking to borrow a speaker, you should be able to do that through your RC. So you got to contact your RC and hope that somebody else hasn't already signed it out for the night you want to do your survey. So yeah, we do have a couple kind of in each region. We don't have an unlimited supply, obviously, but we've got a couple in each region.
But you can think outside the box. You can use old computer speakers. You can use old boom boxes that take in an A line or an inline Bluetooth speakers. Like I said, the one I use is a cheerleading speaker, and we bought those for the Marsh Monitoring Program, and I just love it. But it's a bigger one, a little bit bigger. So a lot of people may have options. Steal the kids' karaoke machine. Just don't tell them if it's expensive.
All right, and I think we handled Cheryl's question with that question as well. I have somebody who says, hi, really neat to see the preliminary data. Thank you. My squares are at the base of the Bruce Peninsula. Should I do both Central and Northern Ontario owl surveys? in this area in addition to the eastern screech owl surveys?
You should not do northern. Base of the Bruce Peninsula, I assume that's on the Bruce, am I right? And you should, the central should suit your location quite well. Maybe eastern screech owl would be good there. And so you could do like your eastern, if you want to allow yourself some life, so you could do your eastern screech owl this year and your central next year, or vice versa, especially since eastern screech owls is already started, so it's a little harder to get going. The great gray owls are not going to be seen breeding south of 47 degrees.
Perfect. All right. Skylar has a question, and well, also a thank you to you, Kathy. Question about owl survey conduct. If while playing broadcasting playback, we agitate an owl and it becomes aggressive, should we still complete the entire playback audio before moving on to the next stop?
Well, there's a fun one. So far, we haven't seen that yet, but it's valuable to say that it's always a risk. Ideally, I would finish it, even if that means finishing it from inside the car with the windows open. But if your safety is at risk, definitely stop. Like, the surveys are not so long that I would not continue the full broadcast lengths for barred owl and the eastern screech owl and the great gray owl. They're quite short, but don't put yourself at risk.
All right, thank you.
And that I just quick add something to, like, that kind of goes back to what Kathy was saying earlier about when you're picking your sites, if you can have a couple extra, because you know, maybe you get there and the habitat's not suitable, as Kathy said, but also maybe you get there and it's an unsafe place to stop. Yes. Or for whatever reason you don't feel safe at that site. So that's another reason to have a couple extra in the bank, in case you get there and it doesn't work out.
There's 4 dogs barking at the same time, or there's a lot of reasons why sites just don't work. A lot of it is hydro line noise.
Wow. Someone has says that they managed to purchase a speaker for less than $20.
And it has the wattage and the decibels that they need?
I guess so. They said from Walmart for less than $20. So there you go.
There you go. It all depends what works for you. And if you'd rather borrow one, feel free. It's just, I know that I live in a more of a rural location, so I prefer just to borrow one of the kids' things. I will be honest with that.
Someone wants to, Livia Jones is asking, what is the reason for trying to do all of these on the same night?
It's just standardized because you're taking this data and you're using it later for, correct me if I get this wrong, Mike, detectability and a special kind of power analysis. You have to limit some characteristics and variation. And the easiest way to limit variation is to have all those points done the same night. So you have the same weather and the same conditions, and all those things don't add to the mix of variation when you do analysis.
All right. Similar question to the Bruce one. They're in the Ottawa Valley, Pembroke, Renfrew area. Should they be doing 2 sets of surveys? Thanks.
They should be doing central and probably eastern screech. And maybe if they want, they could throw in long-eared owl if they'd really like.
Why not, right?
Yeah.
Someone has, not a question, but they did get dive bombed by barred owls a few years ago. It didn't bother me. It's part of citizen science.
You know what? We have, this is funny. We have 3 or 4 colleges that are also involved with the barred owl. And I know of one, I think I know who you're talking about there. When they send their students out, they put them in a Visi vest and a hat, a hard helmet when they do their surveys for barred owls. And there's some truth to that, right? To have something on your head to protect your head. And it's quite smart anymore to put on a high visibility vest for any nighttime survey.
Totally agree. All right. So we had a couple other comments just with regards to private property. This is from Stephen Price, and he says he's found that local contractors, hydro and phone repair, they use for their cottage, seems to know who lives everywhere and whether they're interested in wildlife. And some even gave me introductions. And they have, James Kirtland says they have prepped 4 squares for barred owls and can help anyone who wants to go through that process. It involves putting the points into Google Earth and working through them with measurement tools. So James Kirkland is a resource out there for everybody. And we have a question sitting here that is not owl related. So somebody wants to know if we've decided on all of our northern trips yet.
Yeah, our northern canoe trips, we're in the process of finalizing them. I wouldn't say we've totally finalized them yet, but we're getting pretty close.
Wonderful. All right, so I'm not seeing any other questions. I don't know if any other questions have been sparked as we've been talking. You know, I always think owl surveys are so much fun to go out and do. I remember, you know, getting a long-eared owl once doing the surveys in Sarnia, and it was so exciting. So, and you know, we hopefully will be able to bring that back into what we do in programming as well soon. You know, like I said, Kathy, I don't like to be a jerk. I try and teach other people not to be jerks. So it's one of those things, if you bring your friends out with you, teach them not to be jerks, because the temptation is there. Once owls respond to you, then you want to go and try and call owls in everywhere you go. And you know, regrettably, my dad decided to call in a screech owl one night when we were camping at Wheatley Provincial Park. If you ever want to see a screech owl, that's probably a good spot to go. He called it in, and then the owl sat over a tent and called all night long. So, you know, beware of what you might get with that. So
Karma.
I know we have a few announcements. I don't see any other questions there. So before we leave, I know Mike and Kaylin have a couple of announcements. So I'm going to pass it back over to them.
Do you want me to get started, Mike? I'll get started.
Yeah, go for it.
So I just wanted to let you guys know about our next Sappy Hour. So our next Sappy Hour is going to be April 18th, and it's going to be on the app. So I mentioned this briefly during the last Sappy Hour, and Kathy also kind of briefly mentioned it today, but there's been a lot of big new updates for the Nature Counts app, which are super exciting, and I'm really looking forward to talking to everyone about them. And so we're going to be doing that on April 18th, and that's just before our kickoff weekend. So the 2023 kickoff weekend is going to be happening on April 22nd and 23rd. Mike and I are going to be in London on the 22nd and Hamilton on the 23rd, but regional coordinators are also going to be doing kind of little individual kickoff weekend get-togethers in their own regions. So kind of stay tuned for a little bit more information on that as well.
Yeah, including some opportunity to win some prizes. So I know everybody likes prizes, and we've got some pretty cool stuff that we're going to give away. So and not to mention, it's going to be just fun to get together with everybody at those events. So we're looking forward to it. My last thing I was going to mention was, in addition to doing owl surveys this time of year, it's the start of regular atlasing season as well. There's stuff going on right now. Some of my favorite things to look for right now are the big stick nests. So if you're driving around kind of in the country, watching for red-tailed hawk nests, they're getting going right now. Bald eagles are hard at it. Eggs, and maybe you'll luck into a great horned owl nest or something like that if you're finding stick nests. It's also a good time of year. It seems like right now there's red crossbills nesting kind of scattered through sort of central Ontario. So if you're in sort of the southern edge of the Shield area, you know, like Manitoulin Island to Ottawa, kind of that strip, keep an eye out for red crossbills especially. I've heard of some down as far south as like Barrie, so keep an eye out for those. And if you're looking for other other birds to keep an eye out for this time of year, you can head to the website under the safe dates document. We've got it sorted by time of year that they get going. So there's lots to see this time of year, lots to get excited about. Gray Jays too, yeah, Canada Jays. Yeah.
And ravens carrying sticks in Muskoka, which is cool.
Ravens. Yeah.
Yeah, somebody just had a good question. Is there a YouTube video on how to conduct the owl surveys?
A short one? No, they're all very long. Because they're the Ontario Owl Survey training, and I think we did a training video at the kickoff 2 years ago, Mike. So there's nothing short. They're fairly straightforward though, guys. You stand in the dark and you listen and point the direction of the owls and you count them. So they're one of the easiest, I think, field projects that you can take on in many ways.
Yeah, we have some videos about data entry for the owl surveys, but not doing the actual survey. Because as Kathy said, it would be pretty short. But yeah, I mean, like to sum it up, you get to your site, you push play on your playback, and if you hear any owls, you record whether you saw or heard them and which direction they are. And that's really it at each stop. The data sheet, if you want to print the data sheet, that's probably the easiest way to go, but the app will walk you through everything too. It'll tell you what you need to write down for any owls you're lucky enough to hear. And it's really easy if you hear no owls.
Yeah. And either Kaylin or I or both of us will have videos on how to use the app quite shortly. And I'm giving a webinar on how to use the app for the Ontario Nocturnal Owl Survey in a couple of weeks. But it's actually fairly easy. And if you look at the data forms, and if you have questions, you can easily ask, but it's pretty much you count the owls. If you think the owl has recalled in more than one spot, you mark down that it's called more than one spot. It doesn't get any easier than this.
All right. And someone says they bring an audio recorder and record their sessions while they're out there. So if they miss something or they weren't sure on something, they have a way to go back and review it. So
we should mention that sometimes you get things that are not owls. So on top of those frogs, you're going to have to listen for raccoons and foxes and coyotes and moose and whatever else has strange calls at the night. I remember getting very surprised by a horse once. So just be aware that you might get calls out there that are really kind of funny, and they're likely, my answer to everything is raccoon.
yeah, I've heard some weird deer noises at night as well. And, you know, when I've done owl surveys too, I've had like the coyotes get going, which is always neat. Someone wants to know when the new updates for the app take place. Have they already taken place?
Yeah, so the app is already, the newest version of the app, I think, has already been released to the general public. And so a lot of those new updates will be available already. And I'll be going through what all of the updates are on the 18th. But yeah, if you want to download it and check it out, definitely feel free to do that.
So Kaylin, we just have to update our app, right?
Yeah, if you don't have it so that your phone automatically updates apps for you, which is a setting that you can change on your phone, so it might vary from person to person, but if you don't have it that way, then you'll have to go into your app store and automatically push the update, which is what I do. But if it automatically updates, then all the better.
All right. There's one more comment. Just the paper form asks for a distance bracket, and then when you go to enter the data online, and it wants one distance, so it might be better. It might be best if you're going to use paper to online to enter a specific distance estimate.
Is that the testing distance? Yeah, we chose with the online app to go with the distance of the softest calling owl. So on the regular form, you're going to have a testing for the loudest owl and the quietest owl. What we're looking for in the app is the quietest owl that you record, because that really tells us how far the broadcast is playing.
No, it's that he's saying no. First hearing of the owl, compass direction and distance. So I guess,
That's not in the app.
well, I think what they're saying is it asks for a range on paper and it asks for a specific, like you can't put a range in on the app.
Oh,
So it's just best if you are taking the paper into the field, just be sure to make a range distance, like a solid number, not a range.
I would argue that even if you are putting a specific number in on the app, you are still doing the lowest end of your range. You would say it's if you say 1,000 to 2,000 when you're entering it on the app, you would say 1,000. Just because we all have differences in how we record data, and I think if you do it that way and put in that lower number, that's what they will work with in analysis. You can't have a solid number on an owl in the field. It's just, I'd like to know how if you can, but by using that lowest level of your range, I think it works fine.
All right. Well, somebody said, thank you for the great session. Kathy, the presentation was most informative and thank you. Oh, and we have a question building from that question. Before you start the survey on the app, it prompts you to choose a broadcast distance. Can you clarify what this means?
That's probably the test. Am I right? The testing of your broadcast, it's consistent standard that we ask you to test your broadcast at some point before your survey. So you would test your boreal or saw-whet owl, or I guess the eastern screech owl, and see how far you can hear it from, and put the maximum distance that you can hear. So if you can hear your eastern screech owl at 500 meters, you put it down. But if you only hear it at 100 meters, you put that down. And that allows a standardization factor to the broadcasts.
All right, and someone asks if they've inputted that incorrectly, can it be changed? I think Kaylin are both nodding their heads yes.
Yeah, then I guess it can. I think for my program, once we approve it for the Ontario Nocturnal Owl Survey, we can't change. Like, you guys can't change it, only we can. But I think it's different for the Atlas.
Yeah, when you go in to edit your data forms, you'd have to do it on the online Nature Counts web portal, but you can go in and you can edit your checklists, any of your checklists, but obviously in this case, your owl survey checklist. And when you go in to edit it, then you can change that distance in there.
All right. All right, well, I'm just gonna see if we get any more questions coming in. I think we just, people kind of spark each other in terms of thoughts. I don't know, do you have anything else, Kaylin and Mike?
Nope, that's it for us.
Kathy, any other plugs for any other programs?
Oh boy, where do I start? First off, I want to thank you guys for inviting me. It's always fun to do this and to share with everybody. I guess the biggest one I'd like to share is the enabled bird mapping program that I'm a volunteer for. And we're looking for individuals to help us assess trails and 12 birding hotspots across Ontario. And if anybody is interested, it's the information is available on the Ontario Field Ornithologist website. So certainly looking for volunteers for that one.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I think we can wrap it up for the evening unless there's any other burning questions out there. Oh, and Mike's shared that link, and maybe we can share the link on the Atlas page as well, if that's a possibility. I can get it to you, Kaylin. All right, well, thank you everyone for coming tonight, and thanks for having me again. I enjoy coming out and chatting and learning all about these things and listening in and, you know, getting my butt in gear and getting some data entered and all of that kind of stuff that needs to get done for the Atlas project. So thanks, Kathy. Big round of applause, great presentation. And Mike and Kaylin, thanks again for you guys joining us tonight. And I guess we will sign off and we'll see you on April the 18th. Bye, everybody.
Thanks so much, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.